Welcome to NextGen Marin's podcast, Priced Out, where we discuss issues surrounding housing in Marin County. Today, we interview Jane Burke, the Superintendent of Marin County. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to NextGen Marin's podcast, Priced Out. My name is Kelly, and today we have a very special guest. She is the Superintendent of Marin County, Jane Burke.
Great. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. Jane has been the superintendent for over 20 years. Is that right?
Yes.
And you were recently reelected.
I was just reelected, and my next term will start in January 19th, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey to becoming superintendent.
Sure. Actually, moving into the superintendent or administration was never my actual interest. I am a special education teacher by background, and the way I got involved in that is I'm the oldest of 8 kids, and my mom was 15 when she got pregnant with me, and my family very much focused on education as a priority. So that was part of sort of how I grew up, and they provided us whatever opportunities they could. And one of my sisters has some special education needs, so I sort of leaned toward special education. And while I was a student at now Dominican University, I attended there when it was an all-girls Catholic college, and there was a laboratory school actually on the campus that served students with special education needs. And so that sort of helped guide me related to where I wanted to go sort of in the education area. So ultimately started as an instructional assistant in a special ed class on the campus at Dominican. And actually, that's when I began my work for the County Office of Education. So that was about 44 years ago. Wow. So I have been essentially immersed in this amazing work of the complexities of how to make sure kids get what they need in our schools. And then I worked as a special ed teacher, and then had some other opportunities come forward in roles that were a bit larger, but larger meaning administrative roles, maybe being responsible for several classes as opposed to teaching myself in what would be like a principal role. And ultimately, there was an opportunity to be a principal in a small school, and I thought it would be a great opportunity. Enjoyed it very much, and then just took every chance I had to learn more about the work. And it was in 1994 that I was actually elected for the first time as the county superintendent of schools. But I will tell you, there is, in my view, no higher calling than the teachers and people in our schools who are essentially dedicating their life's work to other people's children. And that, to me, is my core, meaning it's not in my office at the superintendent level where the real stuff happens. It really happens with our educators that are doing the hard but most influential and positive work we can ever do in a community, in a community anywhere. So I think teachers are unbelievably called.
Well, I think that's an amazing life mission. Your life mission is really courageous, and it's really important. I think everyone can understand how important it is to educate young minds, because they're going to be tomorrow's leaders. What do you do as superintendent in order to stay connected with teachers in the school districts?
So there's a variety of things that I do. The most recent and most interesting strategy is actually vis-a-vis Twitter. Believe it or not, you get to a point where you have the phone calls, the emails, the et cetera, and you feel a little overwhelmed by all the opportunities. But I find that I'm able to stay very connected with our teachers using just the Twitter feeds. You know what's happening. You can get direct messages. I have teachers that give me direct messages about what they want, what training they want, asking me questions. And that's one small way, but it is definitely my most recent way. And actually, when I get up in the morning, in the olden days, I might have picked up my phone and looked at my email. No, I go first to my Twitter feed because there's enough direct messages for me to get started on a day from educators. But it's also a great way for our teachers to share their best practices. So you can actually see in real time how someone is moving forward on a science lesson that we can then share out to all the other teachers, at the particular grade levels and so on. So that's one. I also have opportunity to do a lot with our teachers related to professional development opportunities. And we try to make sure as a team that we have our ear on the ground related to what it is they want, what can be the most valuable. And what I see is that my role is to be of service, period, not to make more work for teachers, but to essentially try to provide opportunities for them to make their job not easier, but let's say a more engaging and positive, because every teacher goes into this to change the world. I mean, there's no question. And so part of my role is to keep them invigorated by understanding what is going on. Obviously, we stay connected with teachers through actually seeing them doing their work, and there's several recognition opportunities that we're involved in, and very often my connection with teachers is just sort of in the store, right? That I'll meet somebody and they'll tell me what they're doing. So there's formal and informal ways. And I think both of those are very important because people can that sit in an office, if you will, can lose perspective about what's really happening on the ground. I'll give an example. Recently, a couple of years ago, I wrote a back-to-school message that went out to all the teachers and classified staff in the county that said, welcome back. It's going to be a great year. We're very excited. The schools are ready for you. To return, hope you had a great, refreshing summer, etc. And then I get an email back that says, you obviously are not in tune. Our school is not ready. So picture the point being, pay attention, Burke. Right. There's more to the story than what you think you know. And then also, so there was something not quite ready at one of the schools. Right. And then in another situation, some of our special education teachers had worked the whole summer. And so I'm saying, I hope you had a refreshing time. And so reminder to me that there is no single set of what the facts are about the work and where people are in it. And so believe me, I didn't send that message again, right? And just try to remind. And for those of you that worked all summer, thank you for that, right? And sort of moved on. So I think there's a lot of different ways. We actually, interestingly enough, have been able to provide some opportunities for teachers to essentially show their amazing work on behalf of the kids through an actual movie we did this last year that was called Creating Curiosity. And I'm sure you're aware, but in education, the most important thing is that you essentially provide opportunities for kids to be curious and ask the right questions, because we know that you can get answers, right, using Siri. And so how do we make sure that we keep our kids totally engaged? So that's something that I would want to encourage people in our community to take a look at. So we know that the education that some people were involved in, it's very, very different when you look at cooperative groups, how kids are getting along, and so it's a wonderful field, and the teachers in Marin are actually nothing short of amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's good to know that that you're definitely staying in touch with educators. I read a couple of articles about your most recent re-election and how you got there. You had your first ever opponent, from what I read. Yes. And I read a quote that he had mentioned maybe he felt like, maybe you'd been in the office too much. So it's great to hear that you are doing what you can in order to stay connected. I think that's so great that you're providing opportunities formally and informally. I actually saw your Twitter feed and I thought Twitter is one of the easiest ways to stay in touch with people and to get news. So it's really nice to hear that an elected official is, really working on being in contact with people.
Last night was the Novato High School homecoming. So the parade down the middle of Novato.
Right.
And so in the middle of, so I just happened to be down there. And so it was like within minutes that we're on the Twitter feed, right, sharing with the community what's going on. No, I think it's good. Keeps you like right on your toes. I'm going to be trying to do more in that whole social media space.
Yeah. Well, so being that you've been a superintendent for quite a while, I want to ask you about the differences that you see between when you first started in that position and even just in Marin County in general back then and now. Like, what are some of the differences you see with enrollment and perhaps with teachers?
Well, over the years, there have been definitely some significant differences. Marin County, 24 years ago, was a county that essentially 80% of the students we served were Caucasian. Today, things have changed in the most wonderful and positive way in terms of what our overall demographics are. And that, I think, is one of the greatest gifts that we actually have in Marin County. We had children, 20 years ago that really grew up in a bubble, frankly, including my own two kids, and essentially had not yet had the opportunity to understand the importance of the diversity and what our world really does look like and how it is that we're going to be able to make the world even better than it is. So that would be one. So the demographic change. Another change is really the focus on a growth mindset for kids, that it's not about getting the answer. It's about really delving into and understanding well what it is you're trying to learn and why. And so you do not see the rote strategies that were in play 20 years ago. You will see experiential, project-based opportunities for kids. So when people walk into our classrooms now, they're thinking, this looks like chaos. And the answer is, it is. It looks chaotic, but it is an organized chaotic, right? That is about helping kids sort of figure out how they can accomplish what it is they need to accomplish using all the sources that are available, including the strengths of their fellow classmates. Another big shift would be in our teaching population. We would have had absolutely no trouble whatsoever to get teachers. Marin County has always been a place that teachers would want to come and teach, and that is directly related to the public support. The schools of our community are supported by the community and the public, and with that comes high expectation and high demands. So if you're that person and you get how important that is, you absolutely want to work in Marin County. And that we would have no trouble whatsoever in any area, including high need areas now that we would describe as science, mathematics, special education, speech therapists, school nurses, those kinds of things considered high need. And here we are 20 years later, and it's a very serious issue in Marin County and in our state. Related to being able to not just hire, but to be able to retain our teaching and classified staff. We, at the start of this school year, and this is counting all the public, private, independent schools, we had 59 teaching positions that were not filled on August 15th, just to give you an idea. And there are many, many reasons for that, and it's not for not trying. We do job fairs countywide. We go out into other communities to try to recruit people to come to our schools. We send notices out to people in the community. Hey, do you have a BA? Anybody want to come and get retrained to be a teacher? We've written grants for classified staff to be able to, while they're working as a paraprofessional, by way of example, that there's some additional resources available for them to get their teachers. We have boot camps for paraprofessionals to try to ensure that as we look at our teaching population, that we have more models that look like our current population of children. So it's not just white women, right? We want to make sure we're addressing that. So there's a lot of work that's happening in the area, but there are definitely some barriers that get in the way of educators being able to even consider Marin County in spite of strong schools, wanting to be better, high levels of community support. That's not enough. Right. And we need to think about those barriers and try to figure out what we're going to do as a community.
Well, what do you think those barriers are?
The barriers, I would say, start with areas that some would say, oh, that's not about school, but a picture has to do with transportation. In other words, the time it takes if you don't actually live in Marin, and even if you do live in Marin, to get from one district to another, one school to another. But I think it really centers on housing. If I'm a teacher, where am I going to live? And the answer is, if you're a teacher on a teacher's salary, you're not going to live in Marin. True. You wouldn't be able to rent in Marin, nor would you be able to buy a home in Marin. A new teacher in our community, depending on the district, maybe makes about between $50,000 and $60,000 approximately. And as we well know, that wouldn't provide any opportunity at all to be able to live in our community. And so what tends to happen, or as it plays out, very often we have a teacher that comes that actually has already lived here, right? Mm-hmm. So she or the parents live here, they live with their parents, right? And that can work, right? Or you can have several different teachers living together in an apartment, that sort of a thing. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, what happens is what we would want for anyone is the opportunity to actually live in a community where you have a home and you can raise your family, and that is just not possible given our community. And while we're working on particularly identifying people that might have a room in their house that they'd be willing to rent, that is not a long-term solution. And so if I were going to say, like, what's the number one that doesn't permit us to provide opportunities for our teachers to come into the county, it would be to address issues of housing and then the side issue of transportation. So those two, in my view, go together.
You mentioned housing and transportation. In the news recently, there have been some mentions of housing for teachers. We have the mention of San Marin, that it's 22 acres? And then College of Marin, there have been some talks about, housing for teachers both in Kentfield and IVC. What do you think about those opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think they're important and necessary. So number one. And yes, they are opportunities. The key will be when we say teachers, I want them to be looking at educators, because it's not just a teacher, right? It could be other people working in the schools that also would need access to opportunities for housing. So that's number one. Number two, I also think that an ultimately very vibrant community wouldn't just have just teachers. So I would love it if it's, workforce housing for people that are working in our city government, law enforcement, teachers, nurses, all of that sort of coming together so it's not just a teacher community. That
Right.
just seems so boring and narrow, so we want it to be something that lasts, right? So I think the thinking is wonderful, but here's the deal. These issues, these opportunities have been there before, right? And for whatever reasons, and I'm going to say primarily a community outcry of we don't want that in our community because of traffic, et cetera, et cetera. So as I think our leaders look at these issues, they have to be thoughtful about being sure that our communities have input and they get insight into who are the people that need these housing opportunities, and actually relate it to the benefit that the community receives. And it is just everyday people doing a job. It's just like, a point that all of us were at some point in our career. And I think the more we can put a face on who the people are, that will make a difference, instead of those people. I don't want those people. Whoa, those people that's your teacher.
Yeah.
That is your teacher. Her name is Miss Sullivan, and she is working in the second grade class, and you can't believe it. And we will be so much better and stronger if we get to keep her, number one. And number two, that she is able to live in our community and invest her, her time and energy right into the community and raise her family here. So we have to sort of look at this in a bigger view. Not everybody can see that. But I do believe that with appropriate data, information, what shall I say, putting a face on who the people are in our community that need these opportunities, that our communities will ultimately support. But in the end, I think the leaders who get to make these decisions need to be willing to make them, even if they are unable to achieve full support from a community. They can't just say, oh, we can't do this. They don't want that, right? Because the bottom line is that Marin is going to continue to lose its vibrancy if we're not able to figure out strategies that the next generation is able to actually live and thrive here, not just live, hand to mouth.
Right.
So we've got a lot of work to do, and it will affect all of us, and definitely will affect the children in our community through our schools.
Yeah, I think you made an interesting point that elected officials are just that. They're elected by the people, okay? They get where they are through the community. And I think that there is some fear in losing that position and doing the tough thing, doing the unpopular thing, even if it does benefit the community. And it's sad to think that the people that are hurt the most from, teachers not being able to have a place for just educators in general are the kids. I was reading something in the Marin IJ that mentioned the potential closure of a school in Novato, perhaps because of enrollment. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I know that the district, as they try to make sure that they are fiscally solvent, and one of the things they do is make sure they're looking at out years, so they don't just deal with their finances in the current year, but the current and 2 subsequent years. So they're definitely trying to determine what are they going to need given the population. But that's another impact of housing. The houses aren't turning over. Young people can't move in with families. And then what happens? You have a decline in enrollment, right? So, and this is, we know families want to live in Marin. These are indeed the best schools truly in the state. And so I think that that's another, side effect for sure, is, what we would have to do if we don't continue to have families moving into this community. We could end up to be just one big old people's community, right? I mean, truly, right? Just a bunch of people. And then at some point, there'll be nothing here. So I think we have to look beyond the current situation into the future. One of the things that there's a quote by, I think the name is Walter Isaacson, or I think that's his name, Isaacson. And it goes like this, that we all eat fruit from the trees we didn't plant, and we drink water from the wells we didn't dig. And so the reminder as a community that we are all benefiting from those that came before. And it is absolutely, unequivocally, from my perspective, our job to do the same for those, right, that will be coming after us. And that means we really have to tackle some of these very critical and important issues that will keep Marin strong and thriving.
Mm-hmm. I also think that it should be recognized that parents, educators, people in general, I think, need role models for their kids. And I think this speaks volumes about what we want to teach our kids. You know, if we're not sticking up for the well-being of everyone in our community, what are we teaching them? I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. I totally agree. I am known frequently to say something of this line. Just reminder, whatever we're doing, our children are watching. They are watching. How is it we deal with difficult conversations? How do we prioritize our time and limited resources? You know, what is it that we are telling our children we value about who they are and who they're becoming? And this starts at the youngest ages. I had an example recently talking to my grandson. He's first grade, and he was playing soccer. And I said, and his name's Stinson. I said, hey, Stinson, did you pass the ball? I didn't say, and it wasn't actually as thoughtful as that might sound, but the result was he had a whole story, like 3 or 4 minutes, about passing the ball, who got the ball, that they ultimately made a goal, et cetera. And he was thrilled. And then later in the conversation, my son said, hey, Stinson, tell Grandma you got a goal. And so point being that we as adults can absolutely, through our interactions with our children, whatever their ages are, help prioritize. It's not what did you learn today in school, right? Tell me, is there any question you had? Did you ask any questions? Were you nice to somebody? Who did you sit with? I mean, all that stuff. So there's a lot that we can do that we don't focus on. And it's simple, easy, doesn't cost money, but can change children's view of their responsibilities as they grow up.
So I want to ask about your knowledge of what Marin County is doing in terms of technology in schools. I'm interested to hear about that.
Sure. First, I would want to just sort of frame it up to say technology is a tool. Right. So that I think is really important before I sort of proceed here, and that we need to be reminded that it is a tool and there are so many opportunities as a result of access, right, to the internet and so on that we have. However, it never takes the place of a highly effective, engaging, caring, compassionate teacher. So that's one. There's a lot of ways that we're using technology. It is more, I would say, more common than not. Back in the day, we would have had labs where students would go to get to use the computers. Now they're fully integrated. Most students actually have cell phones, right? And on the cell phones, you can actually, engage kids in a variety of ways depending on the school. There's different ways that they approach that. One of the more interesting things we're doing right now, that is sort of on the edge, cutting edge, is utilizing virtual reality, augmentative reality, 360 video. So that is a shift in that we got a small grant. We actually have a site at Hamilton in collaboration with the Novato District and the library, where we have 1, 2, 3. I think we had 3 boot camps this summer for students in each of those areas. And it's amazing. So essentially, a student can be totally immersed in a different way around their learning, and it is making I think a difference because our students are actually developing the content. Mm-hmm. So that is something that if you read, and well, you do obviously read and read the paper, you look and you hear about Walmart is using VR to train their people. So first responders are being trained. Alaska Air, people that are in first class for a couple of weeks get access to virtual reality.
More immersive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool.
So given that, we want to try to ensure that we're providing access for students, and we're adding to that training for businesses, because whenever we're working on stuff like that, you've got to think through it like a sustainable strategy. And so providing at a cost training for businesses to be able to teach their people how to use the technology. We have an advisory board that's like unbelievable. That's, I think going to make a huge difference. And another thing is that right now we've been involved in sort of the preliminary content development around there are some basic trainings that all educators have that need to take year over year. One of those is sexual harassment. There's a lot of issues around that issue at the kid-to-kid level, kid-to-teacher level, adults. And so we've been part of a process where developing that training using virtual reality. And that's very interesting, because if you're doing something on a computer, there's no visceral reaction. But believe me, having been in a couple of those sessions using VR, you are impacted by observing actions that are inappropriate, and it sort of helps you understand how important it is. So that we are training well. So that's another area that we're working on. There's a lot of conversations that happen between kids in our schools, with other places in the country, along with the scientists. So we are using the technology. And recently, the doctor from UCSF was in one of our elementary schools and sharing with the students. He's actually a neurosurgeon, but talking with them first and foremost about his love of football, so soccer, and so that was where the kids got him, right? So that now the kids are paying attention to the doctor, and ultimately shared with them how he uses virtual reality in brain surgery. And let me just say one other thing interesting that I think is interesting. In the area of special education in particular, we have a technology resource center, and so imagine if you're a student who either has not yet been able to communicate in the way that we are, right, using words, and might not have the physical ability to sign or use other avenues. We have a whole center that is designed around assistive technology that would help that student be able to communicate with their peers using a variety of different, some complex, some not so complex devices. But one of the things they've seen is that for some of our students who are, because of their physical challenges, will not be able to walk, run, or jump, right? Having been in a virtual reality environment, that they're actually seeing improvement in muscle tone, just having
that
yes.
experience.
So there's a lot there.
That's
so
amazing.
So that's that's fabulous. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot, and part of it is trying to make sure that we don't lose the basics. And to me, it is the human interaction and the highest value skill that we're going to see, I think, as we look to the future, is not going to be the people who can get the answer or solve that particular problem. It will be the people who are able to communicate across the table or next to colleagues, because that's the piece I think we need to put more focus on, is that so many young people have their head down on their phone, right? And they're very comfortable interacting in a virtual environment or vis-a-vis, the computers, etc. But to me, the highest skill will be the ability to look people in the eye, articulate your view, wonder about someone else's view, ask questions, and be able to ultimately influence towards better policies like housing, right? And that if you can't do that, even if you have all those other gifts, that will mean we have failed our students. So we're working on that too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And getting back to the housing thing, I do have a very good friend, and she taught at a school in Marin, and I think there were some budget cuts or something, and I think that's definitely a concern. It's interesting looking at the side from from a teacher's perspective, and in terms of experience and all that, and being a young person living with her parents, and trying to start this new life on her own, and having to be living with your parents around 25, 26 years old. Whereas a lot of people would be out on their own, back in the day at 18.
Exactly. Well, even, my son lives in Boise, Idaho, and his wife is a teacher. And in that environment, they are able to flourish financially. They don't own, and they're young, they're 37. They don't own one house, they now own 2 houses. Wow. I mean, so in other environments, and that's what happens. And my son's wife is one of the most amazing ever science teachers, high need teacher. They can't be in Marin, right? They can't provide the same life for their family, for their family. So, and for us to not take on seriously what, we're really working on the edges. We're working with Landed, which is an organization that helps provide down payments for teacher educators. Yeah. So we have that small thing, where we have a committee in the county that's called the Efficiency Effectiveness Group with school board members and superintendents that are looking at ways to collaborate around housing issues, trying to lessen the regulations for people to have junior units or junior suites on their campuses, on their sites. But I think at some point, what we have to do is sort of bite the bullet and say, here's where we are. This is what the data shows. And if we believe that those that serve our community's children, right, and other areas, whether it's law enforcement, county government, we have to make sure that they'll be able to, live in this community. It will be critical, I think, to us. Even right now, you may not know this, maybe you do, that in the sheriff's department, he has people living there, right, at his offices, that live in Humboldt. They drive here, they live there. I mean, come on, let's figure, okay, embassy suites, here we come. No.
Right. Well, something that really gets me is I do participate in online forums, and I try to, stay up to date on what people are saying in the community. And something that gets me every time, I understand it, but it doesn't mean I like it necessarily, is, well, people who can't afford to live here, you're not entitled to live here, go somewhere else, move away. Yeah. And I get frustrated. I've lived in Marin my whole life, working here. I'm trying to be an advocate for housing somewhat. It's a difficult thing to hear. And,
Well, and to me, let's just go with that concept. Right. That misses the point about you're eating fruit from the trees you didn't plant.
Right.
Right? So the person who holds a thought that they're entitled to live here, they made it on their bootstraps. So there's that mentality that can come into play. And the view is none of us did it on our own. And so for anyone to sort of stay in that space without just broadening a little, hey, the roads, who did those roads for you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we are so interconnected. And I keep thinking, and I do know, people that I know that actually believe they made it on their own. I did it myself. And that, I don't believe that for myself for sure, but for almost anyone, because at some point, we took advantage of an infrastructure that was already in place for us, and other people gave up to make sure that we had the roads, and we have, so it's like, how do you help people see that? But and I know there are some, I already took care of my kids. I don't need to take care of those kids, right? And then to me, the response is, yeah, but somebody, right, helped you take care of yours. And it gets back to sort of the collective responsibility that we have ultimately for the community at large. If the philosophy is maintained that if you can't live here, right? Then it's not an entitlement. Don't live here. That will be the next, headline in our paper will be the dying of Marin.
Yeah, well, it's been in the paper several times, mass exodus in the Bay Area. People are leaving, people are planning on leaving. And especially for people who say, no one, certainly I don't think that people get a free ride. That's not my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
I think that everyone has to work just like the next person. But, for people who maybe are saying that, if you don't have enough money, you shouldn't live here. First of all, they probably moved here when it was a lot cheaper. Second of all, what about your kids? Do you have kids? I'm sure people that value family want to keep their kids close and they want to keep them in the community. I know I wouldn't want to live across the country for my kids or, even a flight away. That's tough.
And so I think our responsibility, and it's something I think about in education a lot, is that people come with all different views. Mm-hmm. And those views are important to them. They've been ingrained in them in whatever ways. How do we honor their views? Mm-hmm. Number one, have civil discourse around the differences of opinion, knowing our children are watching how we're doing that, right? So that we ultimately, people are heard, they have their views, they hold their views, we don't take them away, but yet that the leaders and elected officials in our community make the decisions based on what they think is going to ultimately be good for all, right, including those that might not be interested in that piece. It doesn't mean they can't be heard mm-hmm. and listened to, even if the ultimate decision is different than what they hoped. That's why it's so important who we elect, mm-hmm. because ultimately we want elected officials who actually have a position, take a stand, mm-hmm. and ultimately are willing to lose that position for what it is they believe is right, what their moral compass provides for them. And I think sometimes people think, oh, I won't get elected. Baloney. I think actually, first of all, you want those who elect you want you to be representative of them, but they elected you mm-hmm. because you will have more information ultimately. So that's something I think for all of us that are elected to be reminded that it is important to take strong and courageous stands, even if there are those that do not agree. It doesn't mean that they would not respect your willingness to take action in the area that you believe is essentially the right way to go on behalf of a community.
Mm-hmm. So, and you mentioned voting there for a second. Do you know of any programs or anything that they do in the schools in order to educate kids about voting?
Yeah. We've actually been doing quite a bit in this area. Just yesterday or this week, there was an actual activity that went on in San Rafael high school that got, I forget it was, I think it was like over 300 kids to register to vote who had not yet registered. Yes, so there's a push there. There is some collaboration with the League of Women Voters. Mm-hmm. That's been going on. Great collaboration, and I'm with our elections office, and we have sort of this online program to get kids, to get students to register. You can actually register now before you're eligible to vote, so we can start that process, I think, at age 16. So we really are trying to, I think that's the answer. I mean, back to it, right? Mm-hmm. Who are we going to vote for? Why are you going to vote for them? Make sure that you're, paying attention. I do think there's a heightened awareness around the importance of voting, but even in Marin, if you look at the last November election, we were still not where we want to be, right? We want people to exercise their right? People in other places don't even have the right to vote. And given that you can do it in a variety of ways, including absentee, mm-hmm. That to me, there's no reason not to vote, right? And I feel like that is something that we need to do more work. But there is definitely work happening in the schools. There was a great program last year, front page of the IJ, around encouraging students to sort of take action related to their ability to vote. And there was a collaboration year prior with Dominican, and we had people from all over the country that were weighing in, and that was at the time of the presidential election. I'll say one thing on this voting. A year or so ago, we had a huge, I'm a big advocate and feel very strongly about early childhood education and the importance of young kids having developmentally appropriate play-based opportunities. And we know that if that happens, that the gaps that we now see between children that don't have those experiences, typically in a preschool, those gaps are very, very difficult to ever shift. And people talk about the achievement gap. In Marin, we had an opportunity for the voters to vote for a sales tax, $0.25 that would help provide preschool first for kids of the highest need and then to all children. And we ended up losing, not by that much, and I might have my numbers wrong, but something like 4,000 votes ultimately, which isn't that much. But we also saw the political issues in play, and believe it or not, the opponents, this was totally about early childhood and preschool, the opponents put up no on it will increase affordable housing. Had nothing to do with housing, but that's the technique they took, right? Which of course tells us more about our community and what, gets people wondering. But the thing that was interesting was I made some assumptions about people who might have voted for Hillary would be likely to vote for this, right? For young children getting preschool. And if you looked even in Marin County, the number of people that voted for Hillary, there were about 9,000 less votes. People didn't get down the ballot.
Right.
So that's the other issue about voting.
Right.
Don't just vote. In fact, I want to say start at the bottom of the ballot. This is our local stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. Let's say this. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of very, very good people who want to do the right thing. I think we need to do everything we can collectively to provide opportunities for people to get engaged in whatever way they can. But I just want you to know that for me to have the opportunity just to be here with young people who are already, right, well ahead of where I would have been in my early college days. I would probably have been more centered on me, and to see you all already advocating and providing strong voice to important issues in the community makes me know the world's going to be a better place, right? As soon as you get in charge. And so we have to do everything we can, I think, to facilitate your opportunities to have a voice on a bigger stage.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate you coming here and talking with us about your position and housing and everything. It's a real honor to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, I can't wait to come back.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching our podcast, Priced Out. Be sure to check us out at nextgenmarin.com to stay up to date on all things housing. And also be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to stay connected with NextGen Marin. Thanks for watching.